All right, boys, special topic today. Even more special than I think a typical topic. We're going to talk about fatherhood today. I think the spur for this, Alex, was actually your Instagram reel you sent to us, the one of Gino from UConn. You should describe it, and then I can tell you why it made me think that we should talk about being dads.
Shamelessly on Instagram and saw this reel. It's Gino Ariama, right? Is that how you say his name?
Yeah.
Yep.
Obviously the UConn, women's basketball coach. I don't know how many titles he's won, an absurd amount. And he was talking about one of his players' experience with their parents coming to a game. And obviously all his players, their parents travel, some further than others and come to games. And this idea of being in the car to and from a sporting event or any activity with your parent and really the after the fact, the drive home, right after a game. And he was talking about the differences of players that dread these talks and have anxiety, right? Maybe they didn't score enough points or they didn't perform at a high enough level, and they get in the car with their parents and they relive these experiences, right? And they rehash these things versus he had this player whose parent, I think dad, never did anything like that. Drove a long way to go see her play. And she was talking about how her dad, on the drive home, she loves it so much, but they don't talk about basketball. And the dad pretty much was like, I come to see you, right? I don't care how many points you score, right? I don't care about that. Obviously I love watching you play, but I just, I'm coming to spend time with you. And it really made me think because, we live here in the Bay Area, Ravi, and you spend sometimes going to and from a sporting event after school or on the weekends, it can take, 30 minutes each way. And it's an hour of certainly quality time that you have with your kids. And it's something that I cherish. I really work hard to be around in the afternoons after school, to be there with my kids and driving to and from. And it really made me introspective about those times and things that I may be signaling to my kids. Right. And I have three very different kids. My oldest son is very sporty, a lot like me. Every season, he's in 2 to 3 different sports at all times.
Oldest? He's your
oldest.
firstborn?
He's my oldest. Yep. And he's very competitive kid.
Is he over 6 feet now? I was hearing the other day, someone said that he's just sprouted.
Yeah. He's growing quick, sleeping a lot, growing fast. He just passed his mom.
Yeah.
So
big day.
Yeah. And anyway, so I thought about this because
we'll go through the rest of them. You got one.
Yeah. And then my middle son, who's a 6th grader, he's the most unique kid. He is so talented, so creative. He is in all arts, right? This guy, he wants to be the next Steven Spielberg. He's a thespian. He's in musicals. He can sing. He can dance. He's the lead in every musical he goes out for. And it's just natural. This kid's he's musically talented. It gets none of this from me, by the way. This is so foreign to me. I don't have an ounce of any of this talent. And I marvel at it. But again, it's so foreign to me. So our rides in the car are so different, right? After his things, I have no business, analyzing anything he's doing. I'm just such a fan. And again, I love it. And we goof off and it is not a serious conversation. I don't grind on him at all. And then my daughter dances and does competitive dance, which by the way, is bananas. Cause you want to talk about the most subjective thing in the world, your little girl going up there by herself or with a group. And it's very athletic, but she's literally being judged by these, and it's and then they hand out these trophies and medals and you're getting compared against one another. I have a hard time with this one, but anyway, it's so subjective, but all three are so different. And so my rides with all of them, whether it be dance carpool, theater carpool, or the soccer carpool, are all very different. And it made me think about that maybe the pressure I may be adding to my oldest son, because I've done this. I've rehashed games. I've been that. And what am I, is that healthy at all? And again, my experiences with my other two, especially my middle son, who, again, we listen to show tunes in the car and laugh and goof off. And there's no at all. I just don't even have, again, the background to be analytical about what he's doing, right? Like, again, I'm just so proud and happy for him. And again, it's so anyway, like that just it was on my mind. And we talk a lot about fatherhood. And again, it obviously makes me think about my relationship with my dad, which is phenomenal. And again, those same moments, right, of being in a car, the good times, the bad times, and leaning on him. And again,
What did he say to you? Obviously, we're going to talk about our dads on this episode. What'd your dad say to you?
I never had pressure to perform from my dad ever. Ever. And, and at times when I didn't perform and I was at my lowest, like for me, middle school baseball was the worst because like I felt like everybody around me had hit puberty and I hadn't, and all of a sudden kids are throwing really hard and it's like pony league baseball. And I was little and I struggled at the plate a lot at that time, right? Guys are throwing fast and curveballs and stuff. And just really lost my confidence at the plate and can remember like tears in the car, man, lots of times coming up from games where I wasn't playing or I'd struggled. And, my dad obviously at times like just pulling the car over and talking and I think trying to help me with perspective and, like it's a teachable moment.
No pressure academically either, Alex. You said no pressure to perform in sports, but was there any pressure to perform academically? He's a principal,
I think in all of these things, and this was the answer to that question is like effort was expected though, right? Like attitude and effort were two things. Like you were going to be a great teammate, but effort was the best way to show it and like hustle. So that if I ever heard my dad critique me, it was about that, right? It was literally a lack of effort. And so school was probably the same thing. Like if I wasn't applying myself, certainly that was, brought up. And my dad's like, he's not afraid of confrontation, right? Like so that is that's my distinct thing. And then I really struggle. And Shane, I'd love your perspective because like my oldest son, his dad played professional football for a long time, like that. He somehow thinks this is like a normal reality, maybe, and achievable. And like the pressure, like he shows up at practice and has to deal with who his dad is and other kids talking about it. Again, like it just really made me think about when I go drive him to soccer or football practice or basketball games, like what, and I think for all of us in fatherhood, like we're just trying to do the best we can. And like none of us have the ansers and figure it out.
I'm still waiting to find the instruction manual. You guys come across it yet?
I wish.
You got to pass a test to drive a car, but they let you bring the baby home.
Yeah,
no nothing.
Yeah. I mean, to your point, Alex, like, do you remember that moment when you took your firstborn home from school or from the hospital? You're scared and you close the door and it's just you and mama and the baby. And you're like, what the hell now? I mean, I've been terrified only a few times in my life, and I qualify as one, right? And we all have boys as our firstborn. I have a 16-year-old boy and 13-year-old daughter, and I don't think I've cried this hard ever when my son came out. So my wife and I made a decision, and we're not going to find out what we're having. It's like the last thing that Google can't tell you. The search engines can't tell you. So it's the last great surprise. So we're not going to find out. And so had a hunch of the boy, didn't know, but when he came out and I saw his little tallywhacker there, I mean, I cried, and I have, my wife still makes fun of me. But like, it's amazing. Like at that moment, and if you're a dad, I think you understand that. Just like how many hopes and dreams you have at that single moment, and just like all the visions you have. And we all played sports. And so like, just throwing the ball with your boy, with your kid, and just all the hopes and dreams you have in that one instance is the memory that I will never forget. And, sometimes it's good to remind ourselves of that moment, right? When we're looking at them now and going through these things. It's hard, man. It's hard. And so I empathize with you, Alex, on the ride home. It doesn't get any easier. I have the little older kids, and we've all seen a lot in our in our young lives. We have a lot of experience, and I think we're all givers by nature. And so we just want to like, we want to give of ourselves and give our kids like our experiences, so they don't make the same dumb mistakes. But like that's that's the rub. That's the irony. Like they got to go through it. They got to fall and they got to get up and learn and get tough. And so, you know, it's always a balance between letting them fail, letting them learn, not allowing them to have too much pain and suffering. Right. And I have a good friend who told me, look, we want our kids to fail well. That's the goal. If they can fail well, then we've done our job.
Shane, do you work, your son's in high school and obviously he plays basketball. Do you work with him at all, like fundamentally?
I coached him last 4 years, 2 years in middle school and 2 years in high school. And since he switched schools, I retired to the bench, which is a whole different episode for us. I'm a terrible basketball dad. I was a way better basketball coach. I'm very cognizant of what I tell him. And just because his experience is much different from the standpoint of like, all I did was watch basketball growing up and I watched sports. And so it was a very different experience than my kid. My kid plays video games. So he knows like basketball players from NBA 2K and video games, and he'll watch some games, he'll watch a quarter. So like the nuance that I knew from just watching the Bad Boys Pistons, like hard fouls. Like I knew how to hard foul a guy when I was in like second grade because that's what like the Bad Boys, Detroit Pistons did, right? And so like trying to teach my kid like, hey, when you hard foul someone, you don't want to kill them, but you want to let them know like, you can't come in the lane. And so there's so much like nuance that I always try to be cognizant of that comes just from like our upbringing and playing pickup ball and playing like tough, rough and tumble games that our kids didn't get to play. And that's like the hardest part is to convey nuance, which the best players have the best nuance. And, you can do skill work and understand sort of the macro of defense and how to get in a stance. There's so much nuance that we try to transfer, and especially being a quarterback. I mean, good Lord, it's all nuance, 100% nuance.
So when you were coaching him though, was it hard at all to like turn on and off the dad coach thing or?
I treated him like Coach K treated me. All right. I treated him fairly. And I tried to, because I was always cognizant. I didn't want people to say, "Oh, you're soft on Z." I also didn't want to be a jerk to him and like make him example just because he was like the best player and he was my kid. I tried to set standards for him, which I think all dads do. To say, this is the standard. I think this is what you're capable of. And hey, you're doing a great job meeting it, or you're falling short. We need more from you, and understanding that. So like, but I was very, very conscious of how I spoke to him in front of others, by himself. But I loved it. I loved it. And it's something that I will never regret. So if you're listening and you can you can coach your kids in any sport, whether it's chess, whether it's anything, get involved. You'll never regret it. Robbie, how about you?
Yeah.
When the twins came out, first of all, did you know you were having twins?
We did.
Okay. I didn't know if you were one of those stories that, I got a bonus,
Yeah,
So you had double the hopes and dreams that we did in that moment, and double the anxiety.
What did you call it?
Double anxiety, double dreams and double anxiety.
People always joke, when you tell them you have twins, people always say the same thing. Oh, you have your hands full. Or then they say 2 for the price of 1. I'm like, no, dude, 2 for the price of 2. Okay. There was no 2 for the price of 1, element of twins. No, man, a lot in there. So one, I remember when they came out, they were early, twins oftentimes come early. And so it was scary. They were small, really small. Like Nyan was 3 pounds, 12 ounces. Shrey was 4 pounds, 6 ounces. And so, I think for someone who doesn't know, they were 34 weeks. So, 6 weeks early. And, there are people that deal with much worse. But like our kids were in the NICU for 2 weeks, when they came. And so, I truly would tell you, I'm not sure there's any better people in the world than neonatal NICU nurses, like these people that like keep babies alive in like, the incubators or whatever. Like you said, when they came out, I cried, and I had all the thoughts. And then of course, like, this immediate thing of we didn't actually get to bring them home for 2 weeks. And so, you're you're in this thing and you're kind of watching them in there. And I think Avni was a little bit more sanguine than I was, because I think being a doctor, she kind of knew that they were going to be okay. I think when you're not that, like, and the kid comes out and he's 3 pounds, viscerally, I didn't know they were going to be okay, you know? And so I just wanted them to come home, and they actually, so anyway, that was, but I remember exactly what you said about like the bringing them home. I remember Avni sitting in the back, you know, with both of them back there and just driving like, you know, I don't know, 3 miles an hour or something. You know, like, and it's in New York and you're just like mad at everybody for driving fast. Slow down, you know, that was crazy. I remember one time me coming out, like we had just brought them home and one of them was on the changing table. And I remember like not wanting to get it wrong. So I came out and left them in the room for a second and came out to Abdi, like, hey, well, what do I do with this diaper? She's like, did you leave him in there? I'm like, yeah. She's like, you can't leave him in there. So I like go back, and I remember later being like, I thought they couldn't turn over at this age. Like I thought that literally the whole point is that like we have a changing table and they can't get out. Like, and she's like, no, like ours are so small that their heads are so big relative to their body that the rules of a normal newborn doesn't apply. Like he could actually like flip himself over. And I'm like, this is not fair. It's not fair that like everything I read in the books, like it doesn't apply in this case. And it's such like a good microcosm of like anything you think you know, you don't actually know. I was thinking about what you guys said on the like coaching. You know, obviously I coach my kids. Shout out to Pete Bailey, my neighbor. He told me same thing you just said early on, Shane, of like, if you can ever coach them in anything. And so I've coached them in baseball, I've coached them in football, I've coached them in basketball. The only thing I don't coach them in is soccer because I have no idea, you know, what I'm doing. I agree with you on the zero regrets, even though like having never played professionally or anything like that, it's still just like the best thing ever. It's the best thing ever to be their coach. I do think though, Alex, one thing I've been thinking about is I think I am a better dad on the drive home from soccer games than I am from basketball games. And so I empathize with you guys a bit because for soccer, I sort of have like an appropriate level of humility and almost like indifference is the wrong word, but like distance, where it's just kind of like, all right, what do they want to talk about? They want to talk about the game? Great, I can talk to them about it. They don't, I don't bring it up. And Shane, I remember you telling me this sports psychologist, Bob Rotunda, is that his name?
Bob Rotella, famous golf psychologist.
Yeah, and like the like, what's the right thing to say to a kid after a game? And you know, you always like, what are you supposed to say? Good game. You're supposed to say, did you have fun? And then it's like nothing at all, right? And you told me that, like, you just let them. They'll talk if they want to talk. So on soccer, I think I was actually thinking about this. Like, I'm actually better because I don't bring it up. You know, they want to talk about it, we talk about it. And in basketball, you know, I feel like I like have something to offer, and so I kind of am ready to like tell them something. And I think that like I have to really hold it back, right? Because it's like, no, like who cares, you know? And so the point is, I think that like I do the same behavior after basketball, but it takes more work. It takes more work not to say something. You know what I'm saying? And I can feel it. And I can feel it like the other day, you guys will appreciate this. So, you know, our kids homeschool, you know, so you talk about the difference in coach and dad. For us, like teacher and dad. And Avni does the primary stuff, but I do a fair amount. And the other day in math, like I was helping.
She does the math, or do you do the math?
I do the math. I do the math. You know, you know. I know you're ready to make an Indian comment here, but you know, it was funny. One of my kids, I was helping him with it, and I guess I was a little firm with him. You know, on certain things, he was making some silly mistakes or whatever. And my kids are doing great. They're like really bright, and we're very lucky on that. But anyway, afterwards, I kind of like, you know, told him, I was like, hey man, like, sorry, I was being a little tougher, but like, you know, I just know you know how to do these things. And he, to his credit, he's 12. He was like, he kind of wasn't having it. And I was like, well, what's on your mind? He's like, I think you were too tough. I think that was not necessary. And I was kind of like, okay, you know, and he said that it was a great conversation. I was like, okay, like what's on your mind? And he's like, it just wasn't that big of a deal, the stuff that I was like getting wrong and you were getting too worked up, you know? And I was like, okay, like, thank you. And I was like, I got it. I was like, you know, the thing I'm worried about is if I'm not helping you, what if you made those silly mistakes like in a different environment? And he was like, well, Dad, I wouldn't make those mistakes in a different environment because I would like check my work. Whereas with you, I was just like, well, showing it to you quickly. And I was like, you know what? That's a pretty good argument. And I was glad that he talked to me about it. And I said to him, I was like, you're right. My bad. I was like, I was kind of tired from the day. And I think that made me a little short. And I also like want you to be good at math, you know? And so I think you're right. I was like, not cool. And he was like, oh, that's cool. You know, like big hug. And it was just like done. But it was like a good version of the conversation. You know what I'm saying? Where like he was kind of annoyed. He told me, and I was thinking about it, and I was like, man, like there's so many bad moments, but that was one of the good ones, and it came from me being kind of a dick. And so it was like a good lesson of like, as long as they talk to you afterwards, it ends up being okay. It's not that you're not going to make the mistake, but like I made the mistake, but I'm glad he said something to me about it.
That brings up that, Robbie has 3 amazing young boys. You and I have daughters. And I'm so thankful the Lord blessed me with a daughter. From the standpoint, like, it forced me to be a completely different dad than my dad was for me. When we talk about like the modern day, like father, the modern day father, the modern day like man, what it means to be like a dad, gender neutral, but a dad is, you embrace vulnerability, empathy, and you have emotional intelligence. Now, like, my dad was many things. He was not vulnerable. He did not have a lot of empathy, and sure as shit didn't show a lot of emotional intelligence. I think he did, and he showed it in a much different way than I guess you'd say textbook today. So talk about that. Talk about vulnerability, empathy, and emotional intelligence, especially with your daughter, because it is like, there's really no book for that.
For sure. And like obviously my experience is like, N of 1, but my daughter's emotional intelligence compared to her brother's is like, it's not even close. She's so much smarter and more advanced and can, at a very young age, could connect, I think, and read my emotions so much better and sense where I was at. Where's my boy? The boys, honestly just oblivious, and so that relationship from the get-go, very different. Yeah. And again, I also in this too, Shane, I wonder so much about birth order, right? Like for me, I have 3. And again, I wonder about my oldest son, and I expect so much out of him. He's the oldest. He's so capable, but I still I constantly push on that.
More is more. More is more. More is more.
More is more.
The words of Jimmy Hart.
And my baby girl, man, like it's the opposite, right? Like it just, especially your third go round, like for me, it's so funny. I think about like bedtime over the course of my 3 kids, and like my oldest, we would bed early and we read like 4 books a night, and like we were so diligent, like it meant so much. And then my middle guy, he kind of got piggybacked a little bit because my boy shared a room, so he was there, but we were like less. And then my daughter, like, you just don't, you're just like, she'll be fine, right? Like she'll learn how to read. Like we don't need to like read 5 books a night, And so it just is such a different experience for her. But then on top of obviously, yeah, the gender difference as well. For me now, when she's 8, again, she's a dancer and my wife danced. So it's such a role reversal in that regard. Like my wife is the one that I think battles this with her, right? Like they go practice together and she goes over her routines, and like there is this critique, and then they butt heads, and I can see them. Like my daughter, man, she can, you want to talk about fearless, man. She like, she'll bark right back. Like my boys, I can intimidate. Like my daughter, dude, nope.
Yep.
And then again, for me as the dad, like it's just pure support, right? Like it's just pure support. I'm not demanding at all from that regard. And again, my wife, I think, is just so flipped because with my oldest son, she gets on me about it.
Robbie, I'm in your boat. I didn't play soccer at all, and so when I go to my daughter's soccer games, I'm just like, honey, you played so hard, and I'm so proud of you. She's like, shut up, Dad. I know you played in the NBA, but you don't know anything about soccer. And I'm like, you're right. I don't know anything about, I know about being on a team. She's like, just shut up. And my lovely wife, who did play soccer in high school, has way more knowledge, and she has to bite her tongue as to what she says to my daughter. So I struggle much more with like my daughter finding the right words than my son. So I just kind of let go, especially as girls get into the teenage years. It's just great. It's great. My wife and I have a meme that we share. we say, hey, when we hear the footsteps upstairs, it's such a treat to know what daughter is going to come down the stairs. Is it the five-headed monster or our sweet princess? So it's like Christmas Day every day, and you get a surprise, and that's the fun. I'm going to miss it. Like, look, all the stuff you deal with and all the emotions, and like you don't trade it for anything in the world, because one day it's over. It's over, and you just sit there looking at your wife, and you're like, man, I wish I just had my daughter come yell at me, or my son, or I wish I could go just tell my son, just like wash your hair, right?
Shane, two questions. One, what was your dad like who coached you? Because my dad never coached me on a team. My dad used to be a football coach for everybody out there, and then he got into higher education and became a principal. There was the element that I would ask him a lot of questions about football, but he never directly coached me on the field. So how was that like with your dad? And then the second thing, what this idea of saying nothing, I like that, right? Like that kind of takes the pressure off as a parent. Like, well, which way do you go? Well, you don't have to go anyway, right? Just let them. So is that something you practice, and what's the idea behind it?
My dad was the best. I mean, the greatest little league coach ever. I mean, I still get guys come up to me today and say, man, your dad was the best. And he passed away a few years ago. But like, everyone loved playing for my dad. And like, he didn't teach us like anything about like technique, like none about like throwing curveballs or anything like that. But he demanded that we hustled. He demanded that we tucked in our shirt, that we took, infield sharp, that we ran on the field, ran off the field. He demanded that we always had chatter. We talked about this before, but it's like supporting your teammates. If a kid strikes out, like, man, you go and pat him on the back. You got it, man. And so like just overly positive. Like I can't remember a negative thing my dad ever said to me. Not once. In terms of execution, performance, hustle, not once. And it was just an unbelievable skill as a dad now and as a coach. Like he was way better. So like, even though he didn't have like textbook emotional intelligence, he did. And in his own way, it was off the charts. And so like, he wasn't a man of like a lot of words. And so like, I was the chatty one. And so like, he never had to say anything after the game. Because as soon as I got in the game, I'd be like, man, that ref was bullshit. Like, or man, that ump was horrible. Or like, man, can you believe that kid got a hit? Like, it was awesome. Or like, man, like we played great. And, I told the story. My dad was known for keeping my stats in youth basketball. And he always carried around a binder. He's very, very proud, obviously. He never my basketball coach. And like, he would show me my stats after the game where he said I had like 30 points, 25 rebounds, and like 15 blocks. And there's no way I could have done that like in a, 32-minute game. But I thought that was legit. And he kept stats, and everyone wanted to see Big Ed's stats. There's no way they're accurate. But I think that's what gave me the love of stats and numbers, and I understood them. But like my dad was not the Fred Rogers type. He didn't say, hey, you got to work hard. He was like your dad, where there was zero pressure, zero. If anything, it was me asking him, hey, rebound for me. Hey, hit me ground balls. Hey, let's go. And so I try to be my dad. I don't think I could ever be as good as my dad was for me, and that's the highest compliment I could ever pay my dad.
Yeah. It's interesting to hear you guys though on the like, maybe the absence of expectations on the sports side is consistent for sure with like the way we grew up. My parents were like, have fun, work hard, be a good teammate, whatever, all that. Actually, almost to the point where sometimes you're like, man, I wish you cared a little bit more, right? Like, about it. And I think that I cannot imagine that's a unique feeling amongst, Indian kids. I think though there were definitely academic expectations. Like it was not like let's just see where this goes type vibe when it came to
verbal directives, goals or expectations. Hey, we expect all A's. What is wrong with this B? How did you pick up on that?
I think the first thing I will tell you is like I think this is important because like in the case that my dad listens to this, like. My dad was, I always say he helped give us ambition, but he also like made us laugh. Like my dad, he's not like just like a hard ass. Like he was for sure high expectation on the school side, but he was like really fun too, and thank God my dad like is alive and well and all these things. But on the like academic side, yeah, like he was, I would say that there was like, hey, look, like you were blessed with a good brain. And that means that like, yeah, we want high effort, but we think high effort's going to have high results. And so if you don't have all A's, like WTF, like why not? Like that means you weren't working. That means you weren't trying. Like, and yeah, I'm not overly focused on the result, but I know what the result should be if you tried. Right. And I think that was for sure. And then there was a lot of like, look, like if you want to get a good job, you got to work hard. And that means that you need to achieve in school. And a lot of what they would say is sort of like, you can choose to do whatever you want to do. Right. But you need to have the option to do anything. You know what I'm saying? Like if you choose to go have a career that didn't require great academic performance, great. We don't care. But it can't be because you couldn't get it. You got to be able to have it, and then you got to be able to turn it down.
But brother Gupta, you've been very open about not optimizing your opportunity. So as successful as you are now, if you'd have seen 12, 13-year-old Ravi Gupta, you would say this is a different cat. So like talk about that. Was it rebellion? Like how did you knew there were, a traditional Indian family, here are the expectations. Every time you see cousins and uncles, they expect you to be a doctor, like you said, right? That's the expectation. You weren't meeting the expectation. So like, what's the conversation? Was your pop said, hey, Ruby, let's come talk?
Oh, for sure. I mean, but look, I when I was a kid, for sure, like, and I had, you guys know, my brother, I'll give you guys an example. Like when I was a kid, we didn't get much homework in my Catholic elementary school. We're, technically Hindus, I guess, but like we went to like a local Catholic school and there was not a lot of homework. So my dad was like, well, that's ridiculous. You should have schoolwork. And so every day after school, my brother and I would have to do an hour and a half of like dad homework. Okay. And he would just be like, that's not right. Like you need to be like learning, and it would just be like he would the math work or whatever, something that you or my mom would just give us. And my brother just sat down and did it. And I'd be like, why do I have to do this? Blah, blah, blah. And like, they were like firm, like you got to do it. So one time they caught me, I was reading some Sports Illustrated instead of, I had put it in my notebook and I'm sitting in there reading a Sports Illustrated rather than like, doing the work. And, I caught some hell. So there's stuff like that was going on. But Shane, the real thing that would happen was like, I was basically like, if I get straight A's, they bother me, but they don't bother me as much. So I was basically like, okay, I got to make sure I get the minimum viable grades so that they leave me alone about this stuff. The point that you made, they weren't as focused professional like being a doctor, but they were super focused on like, you got to perform academically. And I think the way that they did that was when I was being lazy was like, they had different approaches. My dad would tell me stories and he'd be like, you're not going to like, I still remember this. He's like, you're not going to like working for someone who you don't think is smart. And if you keep going down this path, like, let me tell you something, that's what's going to happen. And you're not going to like it, okay? Because you don't like people telling you what to do. And if someone's telling you what to do who you don't think is smart, you're not going to like that. My mom appealed much more. She had different approaches of just kind of like, you're kind of letting me down, which also worked. But yeah, like the reason I bring it up is I think that I don't want people to hear that like there's only one approach. Like my thing when I hear this, like I love my parents. I'm super close with them. But the thing I think about is like there are really different ways to like parent and, different ways can work. I just started reading this book that you guys, I can't tell if it's the craziest shit I've ever heard or the most interesting thing I've ever heard. It's called The Sovereign Child. Okay. I read it. I started reading it. I saw it on Twitter the other day. You guys know Naval, right?
Yep.
He tweeted, "This is the most important parenting book I have ever seen." And I was kind of like, I don't know if Naval is a good parent or not, but let me go buy it. So I bought it and I'm like halfway through. And so, the basic premise of this book is? The basic premise of the book is you have to take children seriously. What does that mean? It's basically like you should not have any rules for kids. You should not have any rules for how much they sleep. You should not have any rules for how much they eat or what they eat. You should not have any rules about how much screen time they get. It's like kids need the feedback loop of doing things and seeing how it goes rather than having your like, imposition on them. And so the example on like food, he's like, I have 5 kids. One of my kids eats ice cream every day for dinner. He's like, and he's done it for 3 months. Okay. And so he's like, I'm living it. I'm doing it. Like, I'm not, whatever. I'm like, okay. And he's like, everyone asks the same thing. He's like, what if your kid is unhealthy? He's like, well, then your kid needs to care themselves that they are unhealthy and ask you how they would deal with it. Right. They don't have any rules on sleep. There's no bedtime. There's no wake up time. If the kid misses school, the kid misses school. And it's like, well, what happens if they're unhealthy? He's like, well, one, kids will get enough sleep. They'll like go and make sure that they do. He's like, you never give them the chance to even know that they're not getting enough sleep.
Remember the Adam Sandler movie Big Daddy? So basically it involves Big Daddy.
It's basically that. And, the reason I bring that up is like, I don't know, guy like published a book, like presumably he's doing it. That's a pretty different approach than anything I've ever heard. But I don't know, maybe it works, So I'm like,
the only thing I'd push back on that is, these engineers for smartphones and these companies, they're really good at hacking our dopamine systems. And so if we lived in a world where we relied on instinct and human nature sort of to survive and learn and grow and sort of grow from adversity, yes. But I think we live in an artificial time now where there's too much bad shit that can happen to you due
Shane,
to our phones.
Honestly,
that's the only place I'd really push back on it.
I actually agree with that because I think that if you've read the Jonathan Haidt stuff of the anxious generation, things like that, basically, I think the point you're making, which I agree with wholeheartedly, is like, actually screens are purposely addictive, and that makes them like cigarettes, or that makes them like alcohol, or makes it like gambling. And you actually should be a certain age before you really should interact with those things, because, addiction is you're probably more susceptible to that as a child. And so I actually totally agree with that point on the screens. Even if you remove the screens point, it's still like pretty different than what I observe most of us doing on like food or, sleeping or, academic achievement or whatever. But yeah, phones notwithstanding, I think it's at least interesting.
I think it falls in line. Like, obviously it's an extreme, I think, to give them that kind of like autonomy and just let them figure it out. I do get though, listen, and I guess I would fall it in the bucket of what you're talking about, Shane. They need to be able to fail safely, right? And like the phone and screens, I do think qualifies as like, it is an addictive, it's they can get in trouble. So like I would put it with the things you're talking about there, Ravi, like, right, like you do have to protect, right, against really harmful things as a parent. I do understand it because there are so many parents that I call them the snowplow parents, right? Like they're out in front of their kid, just clearing every hazard and thing that might be in their way, piece of adversity. Man, these kids, like I get asked all the time, as I'm sure you do, Shane, like parents that they're on a mission to get their kid to be a professional athlete, right? And how, like, they want my experience and my take and how did I become this? And it's so funny when I'm like,
I call them champagne dreams. There's a lot of champagne dreams in that AAU gym I'm sitting in the summer.
For sure. And I'm like, I didn't play tackle football until I was 14, right? Like I didn't specialize until college. Like like these guys, you have these parents that, have committed and are trying to obviously shape their kid from their, early on when they're 4, and they're, personal trainers and coaches. And, and for me, again, you're becoming your own worst enemy. So me and my wife talk about this a lot, like going back to this whole like sovereign child thing. Is that the name of it? Your kids need to be intrinsically motivated in whatever it is. Like you can't want it for them, right? Like, and this idea of they need to figure out that motivation, right? And so like you only sometimes need to struggle. And this idea, there's this poem called Good Timber. Have I told you guys about this?
No.
Like this. So it's this idea of, right, like the biggest, strongest, tallest trees in the forest are the ones that have had to like struggle and fight for like light and nutrients. And they're the ones that actually like grow the strongest, right? It's not the one that sits out in the open and gets all the plenty of sunlight and rain and has great soil. Like that's not actually the tree that becomes king. And that your kids are kind of the same thing, right? Like they need to obviously struggle. And to your point, I love the way you put it, Shane, like fail safely. And so I don't know if I would let my kid eat ice cream every single night, right? Like from that standpoint. But again, like, and this is kind of what I talk to parents all about whenever they approach me about this subject. Like, you can't. Like, you can't want it for them, right? Like this idea, the kind of the Earl Woods shape your kid into tiger thing that I think so many parents aspire to be, is never going to happen.
I actually took from it, like you said, it's an extreme. I took from it, though, that I like this language of like, take children seriously. Like they're not just like little people that can't have opinions or, informed thoughts. And I also like the idea of like, let them make more mistakes, that you're not trying to shape little perfect humans. You're trying to help them see the world and, broadly like fail in your house rather than fail in the mean world. You know what I'm saying? So far, I have found it to be, I'm not going to do the full thing, but I definitely have thought about it. And it was interesting. I actually talked to the kids about it this morning. I was like, hey, what do you think about this? And I was interested if they'd be like, yeah, we should totally do that. My kids actually said, they're like, we would like to do that for like a week or two, right? But otherwise, we kind of like the way it is now. And so I thought that was interesting. Like, they didn't just hear like, oh yeah, I'd want to be like that all the time. They were like, yeah, I'd want to try that, but I think that I'd come back to something that looks like, this, which I thought was cool.
That blends into, how were you guys disciplined? And did you discipline your children the same way you were disciplined? And by that, I mean, were you spanked? Did you get the belt? Did you get the wooden spoon? Like, tell me about that. It's even weird saying that now. It's even weird to say that now. It makes all of us cringe because we're like, they're going to get us for bringing this up, But like that was our childhood, was it not?
Alex, do you want to start with the discipline in San Diego, California?
I mean, my parents both grew up on farms in Idaho. It's just a different era in childhood. I know I grew up in San Diego, but like my family, like where they came from, no, it's old school, and they grew up absolutely like their parents disciplined them, spanked them, like your point, belts, and they would always talk about it. Now, luckily enough, I was the third born in my family. So my older brother and sister's experience would have a very different answer to this than mine. It was always talked about, Shane, and always threatened, and it was there. It was there. It never got used on me. The one method I will say, my dad, when I was young enough, I don't really remember this. My parents constantly tell me I was an incredibly stubborn kid, really stubborn, like very hard-headed. And if I wanted to like shut something down, like in a public setting, or I could be very difficult, apparently. And one time I had lost complete control. Again, I'm young. I think I'm only like 3 or 4. And again, to my point, my parents even told me there were times when they wouldn't take me in public, like that I was that difficult. And I'm in the midst of this, like just a total shit, right? And I've lost it, and I can't get control. And again, these things are talked about, but like my dad couldn't get my attention, right? And at that point, turned on a cold shower and picked me up on my shirt and holds me in the cold shower, right? Like, and finally, kind of snaps me out of it a little bit, and got my attention. But again, it was a part of the culture of our family. It was talked about. My older siblings talked about it often. Wooden spoons, again, spankings. I spent a lot of time in the corner as a kid, a lot of time in the corner. That was kind of the go-to at that point. My parents, I think, had evolved. And so it's certainly, again, my experience with my kid, flash that forward, I guess, I was much harder on our firstborn, I think. And same thing, like, I think learned by making some mistakes and being too hard on him and not talking to him. And again, going to your point, Ravi, like not taking him seriously, like more of trying to make a connection, right? Like, these things I'm doing, I'm being so hard, like it's not serving the purpose that I want at all. And so like, I got to try to do something different. And so I personally don't feel like spanking or doing any of that stuff like helps achieve what I want. Right. Like, trying to teach my kids and make a connection with whatever, they were doing. And so again, that's like, obviously I think I try to fall in line with what, like when we had Jaeger on, and things that he teaches and talks about is like, I guess what I try to aspire to do, but obviously struggle.
Alex, I never had to do this, but apparently like the old Indian punishment in India, okay, when someone would get sent to the corner, right? They would get sent to the corner, but they would have to sit in a crouch position and put like in a catcher's position and put their hands underneath their knees and touch their ears and hold their ears like this. And they call it I think they call it like the chicken pose or something like that. And so it's like this deeply uncomfortable thing. And so if you go to like old school Indian people every once in a while, like in like a moment of like, it's not on purpose. If they say they're sorry, they'll touch their ears because it's like from this position where they used to have to go to the corner and put their hands underneath their legs and
That's
grab their
amazing.
ears, which is
That's
amazing.
amazing.
I was never spanked. I actually don't know if my parents, were spanked or not, or I don't know if they were hit with a belt. I suspect not. This was definitely not a family where, like, there was not stern voices and raised voices. Like, if they were pissed, like, particularly my dad, like, you would definitely like let us know. And, a lot of, there was definitely, he was willing to be loud and tough with us if he was mad. And I say that there's still a healthy fear. Like, when I was in high school, we had a playoff basketball game one time, and we came back and we got back at like 2 a.m. I don't know why, but like we got back super late. And the coach was like, "Hey, look, it's been a long day. Like we have a big practice tomorrow, and then we have our big, playoff game the next day. Everyone take first period off, and come into school a little late, whatever." And I remember like getting home and being like, "Hey, mom, like I'm not going to go to school tomorrow at the beginning of the day. Like, I'll go second period. Coach said we should, miss." And she was like, "You should call your dad." My dad was traveling at the time. And I was like, "Okay." So I called my dad, and he was like, "Yeah, you're definitely not doing that. Like, go to bed. You're going to school, like." And I was like, "But dad, coach said whatever." And he was like, "I don't care what your coach said. Like, he doesn't decide when you go. He doesn't decide when you go to school or not." Like, he was so like, "What the fuck," right? And I'm pissed. I'm like 15, and I'm like, all my friends are gonna miss school. And I don't know why. I just like I was so mad. And I was like, and I was always like respectful, whatever. And my dad was on the phone. My mom, I still remember where I was. I was like on the phone, like a corded phone, and my mom's in the kitchen. She's looking at me, and I'm like, "Dad, like, but like, it's just one period. Like, why are you making such a big deal?" He's like, "Son, like, you go to school. Like, we're not missing school for basketball. Like, you go to school." And finally, I'm so pissed. And this is like one time ever. I yell, "Dad, it's one fucking period." And my mom, snaps to attention. It's like silent on the other line. And I'm like, "Oh, fuck." Like, I cannot believe I just like swore at my dad. So I am terrified. And I hang up the phone, right? I obviously go to school on time the next day. And it's been 28 years. And I still kind of worry that my dad's going to like hit me or do something to punish me for the time that I swore at him. Like, I still have the healthy fear 28 years later that like he's like, "Remember that time you?"
He didn't bring it up. Like it was nothing. Like you've never talked about it.
He's never brought it up. He's never done anything. And I think he's saving it. I think at some point he's going to do something, like empty our bank account or something as a mean thing. But my point to that is like, I think even though there was nothing, there was, there was a healthy fear of my parents, punishing us or whatever, even if it wasn't physical. What about you, Shane?
I was spanked only a few times. Let me tell you, I never got in trouble in middle school. I never got in trouble in elementary school. Like once past like kindergarten, I never once, ever got in trouble. Never broke a curfew. I didn't have a curfew in high school, and I think it was because the one time, I'll never forget this as long as I live. I had imaginary friends. I think I had about 3 or 4 or 5, and I threw a party for them. I took out every sock, underwear, shirt, pant in my drawer, dumped it out, took a whole big canister of baby powder, and was like shaking it up and sprayed it all over the room. And my dad wasn't even home. And look, we didn't have a lot of money, and so I knew like my mom was stressed, whatever. And I've never seen her that upset. And she gave me the spanking of a lifetime, of a lifetime, of a lifetime. I still remember crying and howling.
How old were you?
I was like 4 or 5, throwing an imaginary party for my friends, my imaginary friends. And I think that was the moment
Why were you throwing baby
I don't
powder?
know. I don't know. I thought I was celebrating. I dumped the whole thing on the floor. My mom did not find that amusing. And I didn't think anything of it.
No
Like,
shit.
And I got my ass whooped. And my mom did not mess around, was it? And so my dad physically was much more scary, but my mom whooped my ass. And the only time I got spanking, this is like maybe before your time, but the old 19700 1-800-7 numbers, they cost like $1 a minute to call. So I'd call Santa, I called WWE. And in my mind, I'm like, there's no way that they're going to know who's calling. Like how do they know I'm calling? There's no way. There's no. So I call like probably 5, 6, 7 times a day, and to see WWE, talk to Santa, hang up, like no big deal. And when that phone bill came, boy, my mom put me across her lap and smacked. I mean, just beat me. My dad got the belt. He got the belt out. My mom was just spanking. My dad got the belt. He'd like snap it, snap, 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 and he would come and he would hit the bed. I don't think my dad ever hit me with a belt.
Yeah,
but he hit that bed hard as shit. And my brother and I would just be like, "Oh my gosh!" And my dad, like big black guy, he's scary when he got angry. But like that's the only time he really ever showed emotion. So I was scared to ever like disappoint my parents, like incur that wrath. So it literally scared me straight. So I was not afraid to use the same correction for my kids. So I did spank my kids, right? And they were very well behaved, but every now and then they get a little ruly. And I would like, it wasn't like I didn't slap them like I got spanked. But they got a swat. And I think the emotional humiliation was way worse.
Yeah.
Totally.
And not that I'm proud of that. But I just said I had to lay the line. Like, this is not how you act. It's not how you act. There are rules. There are rules and boundaries.
This is the thing where I'm telling you, like people, there are all these people that tell you all these rules for what you can do and what you can't do with your kids. You can never have them feel shame. You can never do this. I'm like, I don't know. What are your kids like? Like before you come and tell me all these rules, like, let me see how yours turned out. And I think the biggest thing I've learned as a parent is like, I don't judge other people's things anymore. You know what? Like whatever works for you, that's fine. Because like, dude, this shit is hard. You care a lot. They're difficult. They are all unique. They push your buttons in ways that nobody else can. Like, like, I don't know. Like I one time saw this lady that I remember before we had kids. I was in the airport one time and some mom, who's clearly just like at her wit's end. Her son was doing something. He's being a shit. And I just saw her like kind of grab his backpack, like the little loop on top, and just like pull him down like hard. And this is before I had kids. And I remember being like, oh my God, like I can't believe it. And then after I was like, you know what, mama? I feel for you. That kid was probably being a real dickhead. Like whatever he was doing, he was bothering you so much. And so I no judgment.
And we're not advocating child abuse here. I think there is a
yes,
commonsensical line about spanking and child abuse.
No advocacy for child abuse on Blue Guys.
Shane, I can so relate on multiple things. My dad, the belt would come out and the bed and the snapping, but like it never actually got like imposed on me, but it was there. And it was like, it worked.
It's scary.
It being out worked. And then same thing with my kids. Again, going back to my oldest, same thing. So I've swatted him, when he was little. And this is kind of what I was referring to later is like the guilt you feel after is like way worse than probably they even remember it. But like it's just funny. And it made me think when you were talking about your mom, Shane, when I was in middle school, and Ravi, you've met my mom, Shane, you haven't. My mom is tiny. Like my mom is like 5'3" on a good day and weighs 85 pounds and little. And when I was in middle school, I was in 7th or 8th grade. I was already like, taller than her. And again, being a total, typical middle school boy, like I mouthed off one time. I'll never forget it. And kind of to your point, Ravi, like she had pushed, she was pushing back and I thought like, I'm big now and I mouthed off. And I do think I cussed. I forget what I said. My mom hit me so quick with a slap across the face.
Yeah.
Like so fast.
Yeah.
Right. Like I remember 8th grade. Like I thought I was cool. And
yes. You probably were shocked.
She hit me so fast. It was like, right. Like the moment the words would come out of my mouth, like, wow. Like, and it wasn't hard. But like it was enough to like
do that. Yeah.
It checked me. Yeah. And it was like, I'll never forget it.
The point of all this though, is like, tell me if I'm wrong. As a dad, I am terrified that like I did not teach my kids right from wrong, and then teach them enough to where they can be good humans, productive humans that help society when we can't help them anymore, right? I mean, that's like the bottom line. That's like my biggest fear that like, oh my gosh, I did not teach my kids enough. I did not set them up for the skill sets that they need. So maybe the ball is right. Maybe that's that's the way to best equip them for this crazy ass world that we live in, where they got to navigate. But it's like that is talk about things that keep you up at night. That's what keeps me up at night. Just like I always joke with my wife like, I'm scared son Zeke is going to be eaten by wild bears because his head's always in a phone or up in the clouds. Like, being able to focus. I know he's going to do great. And he's a very, very smart kid. He gets straight A's. He's a great basketball player. He's going to be fine in life, which my wife reminds me. But it's that fear of like, oh man, like I didn't teach my kids right from wrong enough. I didn't teach them all the things I know what they need to survive in this world. Am I wrong?
Totally. This is where like, yeah, I mean, like I think that this is the point, on the book and just in general, we have to teach them agency and we have to teach them resilience, right? They got to be responsible for their own lives, right? They have to realize that they're the captains of their ship. And also like, the Steve Young thing, like they are not victims, right? And they got to get back up when they get knocked down, right? And whatever you have to do along the way to do that, like you got to do it. And I think that to me, all these examples of like, what we take the best of what our parents gave us, we try to take that and then apply it. And then we try to take the stuff we didn't like and change it. But like, yeah, if I could teach them two things, if I could leave them with two things from like time in our house, the agency and resilience, like that is what that's what I would want the children to have. And the times where I'm worried are the times where I don't think I'm giving that to them or helping them with that.
This has actually been like group therapy. And again, it's kind of the modern dad. Like, my dad didn't talk about being a dad to other dads, other than complaining about probably my mom and, how awful we were as little kids. But, like self-care and mental health as a dad, like that's really, really important that we take time to talk about these things so that we're right, and that is where I am thankful for you guys, but it's okay. It's okay to talk about these things that we struggle and we don't know how to discipline our kids and we don't know, what the right words are to say after a sports game. Right. And I wonder if my dad had that, like how different would I have been? I don't know.
But dude, Shane, this is why it's so funny. People ask me, why we do this, like what do you do? And I always tell them like, the same thing that we've all talked about, right? Like have fun, make something we're proud of, and have some unexpected adventures together. And then I always tell them the same thing. I'm like, look, there is a hidden benefit, okay, which is that it forces us to be on Riverside once a week and actually just talk, right? Like the hidden benefit is that you take some really good friends and it forces you to have a reason to talk to each other. And like you and I, this came from COVID Zooms. Like remember, like that's the origination of this.
Yeah.
And I think that like if I can advocate to one thing for people, it's like talk to your friends with some regularity and talk to them about real shit, right? Because you need it, even if you don't think you do. You need it.
My dad's listening. He would be pissed if I didn't say this. Like there was like a motto that my dad like ingrained in our heads, and my kids even know this now from their grandpa. Like it is two words, and they all know it in the Smith household. It is get tough. Right. Like those are my dad's like favorite words. And I think they kind of encapsulate, because I think his biggest fear for us growing up when we got in the real world was like those things, again, resiliency and agency. And like for him, that toughness was that, right? Like that's what
I'm going to steal that. I like that.
Get and tough. Like you could just complain and like, no, regardless, it was just get tough. But again, we didn't get to it. Ravi, I want to know this personally. Do you give your kids dad homework? How your dad gave you extra work.
Yeah.
Listen, I guess like flipping it.
Yeah. I mean, well, one thing, Alex, by the way, when the get tough, this is a cool symmetry because, like, in the ESPN thing about you, Project 11, Harbaugh has this quote about you that's just so. I'm sure you remember it, but like when he said it, I was like, that's such a good line. He's like, Alex Smith is as tough as a $2 steak. And I just think that like, it's like such an awesome thing to have said about you, especially with him saying it. And I just like, I would imagine your dad hearing that and being like, yeah, he got tough. Like, so anyway, I thought that was cool. Like, Alex Smith is as tough as a $2 steak. Um, the dad homework, like, dude, Alex, like, you could make an argument. Michael Lewis would make the argument that, like, dude, we've taken it to the extreme. My kids fucking homeschool. Like, everything they do is dad or mom homework. And, like, so, yeah, I mean, for sure. Yes, of course I give them dad homework. Now, it's done in a way that, like, replaces school right now rather than, like, addends to it. But yeah, for sure. Like, for sure, they are doing discretionary work based on me. And so, yeah, like, thanks, dad. Even though I hated it when I was a kid, I took it.
What's the coolest thing you do with your kids? You think? What's the cool like? I'm proud of this. This is a dad thing. When they came out into the world, you say, you know what? I'm gonna be a cool dad. We all think we're cool dads. What's the cool dad thing you do that your kids would agree is cool?
The one that comes to mind, I guess, I don't know if this is cool, but I'm proud of it. Every Saturday morning, me and the boys go out to breakfast every Saturday morning. And the idea for it was originally, like, we started it when Savin was born, our youngest, because like Avni just kind of like needed time, like kind of to sleep after like nursing him. And so I just get the older boys out of the house and I'd be like, oh, it's a boys trip. We're going to go to breakfast. And then Savin, of course, when he got like old enough, like to like be, he was like, well, I want to come. And I was like, great. So, and then Avni got a little time at home, just like hanging. And so now every Saturday, just the boys, we go out for breakfast. And I've told them, I was like, this needs to continue even when you're like in college or, whatever. Like, this is a tradition. This continues past. And so, the boys going out for breakfast every Saturday is something I'm very proud of. I don't know if it's cool,
That's
but
cool.
it's definitely like a thing.
Very cool.
No, that's
And
very cool.
we rotate amongst the boys who chooses the spot. So
Cool.
we have a couple of different places we go and it just rotates through. I don't get a vote, but each of the boys gets, to vote or gets to choose where we go.
I'm very proud for two things with both of my kids, very different. And so my daughter's now in 8th grade, but if you met Eloise, she is like super funny. I mean, it's unbelievable personality and just like kind of like me, just doesn't really care. And when we were in elementary school, her school had a daddy-daughter dance. And, I convinced her that let's do something fun. Let's dress up and make it a theme. And so the first year we did it, we dressed up as Dumb and Dumber. Okay. I had my powder blue tux on. She was like in 2nd grade. Okay. I'm in my powder blue tux on, powder blue top hat. And I found her an orange dress. And she wore an orange top hat. And we walked in there and all the dads out there were like, oh my gosh, you guys are unbelievable. So Eloise is like, okay, what are we doing next year, Dad? So next year, the theme was solid gold. We're all glittered out in gold. And then the last year, it was like hearts, Queen of Hearts, King of Hearts. And so my daughter now will put on a costume and this like, just for a laugh. And I'm like, I am so proud that she inherited my ability not to give a crap about what people say and can just make people laugh and smile. And very proud of that. And then with my son, we started a tradition where we try to see 3 football games. He loves football, loves sports, obviously. 3 football games in one weekend. And so usually it's 2 college games and a pro game. And so when the NFL schedule comes out in August, we're racing through like all the scenarios. Well, if we go to Georgia, we can maybe see a Clemson game and then drive to Carolina, see the Panthers, or, we fly into New Orleans, go see Tulane, drive to Baton Rouge, see the Saints on Sunday. And like, he's got a spreadsheet and it's like, he gets so excited for this. And a couple of buddies come with their kids and we're just idiots. On the bus ride home, the greatest thing was and Ravi knows all and you actually met all my fantasy football buddies who were very clever. Shout out Gopar. So this year we started playing all of our songs in the back of the bus, but we could only play female artists from the 90s. Okay, so all the dads are belting out Alanis Morissette and the Cranberries. And the best part is, like, our kids know the Cranberries. So they're singing Zombie in the back with us, just being idiots. And, like, again, those are memories I will never, ever regret. and they're
Yeah.
ridiculous and they're idiotic, but like my kids want to do this forever and we'll do it for as long as they want to hang out with us. And so, um, you know, get something on the calendar, make it your thing, own it. It's the greatest. It's the greatest.
Alex, you do one-on-one stuff with your kids. I think you told
We
me.
try to go do, yeah, like, because there's three, and we do family trips, obviously a bunch, but try to split off with them and go do like singular things.
We've just started the one-on-one, like whatever the kid wants to do, things. And that's been awesome because the conversations I have with them when I just get one of them are amazing, and different things that come up. And like, I love it. I love it. I actually took it. I think you told me about it, a few months ago, if I recall correctly, Alex. And so we've just like grabbed it.
Well, especially your twins, I can imagine, right? Who are constantly just
totally. And you know them, like they're super different. Like people, it's easy for people to think they're the same because they look alike, but they're super different personalities. All three of my kids actually are really different. Spending time one-on-one with them, you realize and, kind of honor that. But Shane, I think that I like the thing that is cool about your thing with Eloise and Zeke is you can think about it all year. You know what I'm saying? Like it's not just the moment. You get to like build up as well as the memory,
yeah.
Yep. And I think that you end up with like a much more extended, memory, right? Than just the event itself. And that's awesome because you build up to it and then you remember it afterwards.
How do you guys feel? Like, obviously we are all very busy guys, busy dads, busy professionals. So, the phrase work-life balance gets thrown around. But, I think the guilt, and I think guilt's the right word, of trying to balance, trying to chase the professional ladders that we all chase while still being at home to be a dad, because we know our time is limited. That's real, right? And before the show, we're talking about opportunities and like things that we may or may not accept and turn down at the sacrifice of being a dad. I know for myself, at least, I feel a guilt of like, am I wasting opportunity? Am I wasting talent? I've worked so hard to get to this point, but I don't want to mortgage my time with the kids. So how do you guys think about that? Like, and who do you talk to? Like, is it such a weird thing? And the best way I label it is just a guilt that you have.
I feel like I so connect. I have the same reservations, and it gives me anxiety and trying to like find it. And I think it is kind of a modern thing though. Like I think back to like my childhood, and my parents definitely like on the weekends, went to my stuff, but like during the week and like practices, like a lot of times I found my own way there or like rode a bike, and like they weren't like hovering at all. They had jobs. Like both my parents worked full time. Like you know what I'm saying? Like there was a level of like, I just had to figure it out. And I never had my dad at my practice, like watching, like I go to some of my kids' events now, and like there's parents there every day, like at their stuff, right? Like they're very like they're like Halo, like they're just like hanging around. And once I retired, I had a lot of time. Like I mentioned this when I first retired, like all of a sudden I would drive my son, and then I watch practice. And I don't think that that's healthy at all, right? Like, so I do think like any extreme is no good. Like being around all the time, I'm not sure that's a great thing, right? And like same thing, being away full time all the time obviously isn't either. And what that balance is, obviously, who knows? And obviously probably always working at it. But like, I guess I just reflect on, again, I never thought my dad and parents were bad parents for not being, you know what I'm saying? They worked, and that was just like the deal. And I still felt like I got a ton of interaction. And so for me, it's something that I guess I recall because like I've gone to both extremes, I guess, recently, in the last several years.
Shane, it's interesting. I definitely have I have the guilt. I also have the thoughts on it. I think a few things that I try to like keep in mind. One, you guys have heard me say this. I think that the idea of like, it's all about quality time, not quantity of time with your kids is just wrong. I do not. I think that's like a cop out that people use to cope with the guilt. And I've used it, but I think that basically you have no idea when quality time is going to come with your kids. It's not like you can predict when you get that. And so you kind of, in my opinion, need like as many shots on goal as possible. Even if you can plan for like the perfect vacation with them that you think you're going to have all these special moments, like maybe they're in a shitty mood, maybe there's something that went on. You can't predict that that'll be the quality time. And so I do try to get some amount of quantity, in there. And that's more than just like, whatever, like more than a maximum job would allow at any moment, right? But I guess the second thing I do think is like, sometimes I hate like if one of the kids, like sometimes the kids will be up early in the morning and I'm like about to go to work. I'm like, hey, dad, can you play Monopoly Empire with me? And it just kills me when I have to say no. Like, no, I have a meeting, right? Or something like that. Because like, of course you want to play. Like, and how long are they going to ask you for? And then the only way I make myself feel better on it is like, they got to miss you a little bit, like if you're there all the time, no matter what, they just won't take it for granted, of course. Right. And so I try to make myself feel better sometimes when I miss it by being like, it's good for them to miss you a little bit, but finding that balance, like, dude, it's fucking hard. It's super hard. I think about it a lot. So maybe tactically what I try to do is like, I have a demanding job, but I try to limit my travel more than I otherwise would. And I also try to have an extremely high bar for work dinners. Like mine is a job where you could have a lot of work dinners. And you also could have a lot of travel. And I try pretty hard to have a really good reason to be, you know what I'm saying? Like away in the evenings or away overall.
To your point, Shane, and this is probably the crux of it. Like you just don't want to be either extreme, right? Like, and again, it probably constantly like schedules pick up and there's times you're away a little more. Like I certainly in football season am away a little more as I like go back to Connecticut, and it's hard, like especially on weekends. I miss, weekend time is so valuable.
But wasn't it easier though when you were an athlete? Like, you tell your kids, "I'm sorry, like, hey, listen to the schedule, man. I gotta go." And when you were there, you were like fully present, and that's why I give I have empathy for Robbie, like the optionality of, can I go on this lunch dinner date, or do I take my kid to the park? The optionality is the hard part when it's laid out for you, right?
The fact
It's easy.
Could not agree more. When I played, this is not even something. When I was home, and when I worked, and I didn't even think about it. You're totally right. Like now that I do have some say in my scheduling, it's something that it weighs on me way more. Yes.
Dude, it's not just your kids. I'm sure you guys have it with your wives too, right? I'm like, well, hey, why do you have to do that? Like, Shane, you're in Philadelphia right now. I would imagine that question comes up, not just from the kids.
Yeah. Well, you're talking about missing people. I think my kids notice I'm gone more than my wife does, so that's okay. I love you, honey. That's good. But again, that's for a different time. Like an NBA wife, they get used to their husband just going for like 24 hours, coming back, going away for 3 days, coming back. The reunions are fantastic. So, that's kind of our flow. So, I feel much worse about coming to Philadelphia for a day for the kids than I do my wife.
The real thing about this is there's two implications. One, we can do an episode on husbandhood one time, but also, the thing about it is like, I think that the real answer, Shane, is like, we just got to remember to be grateful that our kids miss us right now. How bad is it going to be if they were kind of like, well, we don't care that you're gone. Yeah, sure, dad's gone. Like I talked to a really successful business person one time, and he's retired. He told me, he was like, dude, he's like, when I would leave the house on like the Monday after Memorial Day, he's like, my kids would be like, okay, we'll see you at Thanksgiving, Dad. And I was like, whoa, like that is not balanced. And he was lamenting and regretting it and all that stuff. So I think that like, and then he was later being like, yeah, like my kids are grown, like they got their own lives, whatever. So to me, a lot of it's also just like, yeah, making sure that we're grateful that they miss us, but making sure that they still miss you and they don't just accept. You want the tension. You want them to ask you, why do you have to go? Because if they don't, then that ain't great.
One of my favorite memories from our football trip this year, we played the Cat in the Cradle, on repeat, and all the dads are crying, and all the sons are like, why are you crying? We're just like, just don't grow up like me. You know, it was an unbelievable moment. But in a lot of respects, I hope if my son, grows up to be like me and my daughter grows up to be like me, I'll be okay with that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that'd be a good outcome. All right, that's a good place to wrap. Hopefully, the bad children grow up like their parents. That feels like a good outcome for the world. Hey, hey.